Chapter 1820, Queen of Arms. Newton quickly sent the coordinates to Magneto, Elsa Goodman. "Okay, I'll be right there." Elsa couldn't wait any longer, jumped straight up from her chair, and quickly pulled on her battle suit from the rubbish-like debris. She pulled on her long cotton socks, put on the loose-fitting battle suit, and zipped it up. Then she made a phone call. "Hello, Franklin Control Center? Get me a vehicle. Something big and fast." After Newton called for backup, he and Brian looked at each other. Brian shrugged. "There's nothing I can do if you keep looking at me like that." Meanwhile, Demon Godwu on the ground had locked onto the position of the two in the sky. However, this time he had learned his lesson and no longer dared to rush straight up to the heavens to fight the two of them. Otherwise, next time he might be thrown into space. The mantis-like body stood firm on the ground, and the ground beneath it had become as solid as steel, the best terrain for supporting the body. His body suddenly twisted, his limbs plunged into the hard soil, his head tilted back, and the huge mouth on his face opened wide. He became a black anti-aircraft gun, the muzzle pointed at the sky, powerful energy gathering, red energy crystals passing through the complex structure of the mechanical life form and converging at the launch tube in his mouth. Then, a powerful red energy cannon shot up from the earth and into the sky in an instant. It was a magnificent energy attack like a sky-piercing pillar, so powerful that both Newton and Brian felt nervous. Newton did not hesitate to activate his ability, Newton's second law, and attempted to distort the attack that was heading towards the two of them. The two energies collided, and indeed caused the Demon Godwu's attack to deviate to a certain extent, but the aftereffects of this force still grazed them. Fortunately, Brian responded quickly, and it allowed him and Newton to be in a low-gravity state, which greatly increased their speed. However, after the Demon Godwu's failed attack, the second energy cannon was quickly recharged. The advantage of a cyborg is that it does not need to spend time waiting for energy to recharge. As long as the body does not overheat due to superhuman power, it can fire energy cannons continuously. It can even burst out attacks beyond normal levels at any cost. Boom! 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 One after the other, energy attacks shot into the sky, like pillars supporting the sky that was about to collapse. Brian and Newton dodged in great difficulty. The two of them didn't take the beating unilaterally either. Newton said to Brian, "Help me." He raised the firearm in his hand, and the atheist burst into a golden light. The gun body of the biological weapon trembled furiously, and then a powerful force gushed out. A golden energy ray shot straight down. At the same time, Brian used his own supergravity. The powerful energy attack, combined with supergravity to increase the kinetic energy many times over, passed by the Demon Godwu's energy cannon and shot towards his body. Boom! Demon Godwu's defensive force field unfolded and blocked the attack head-on. Click! A crack appeared in his defensive force field, and it caused a hint of shock to appear in his eyes. What he didn't know was that, while on the surface there were only two opponents, in reality there were three. Brian, Newton, and Newton's wife, who had been transformed into a biological weapon. The combined attack of the three Epsilon-class mutants finally caused his powerful defensive force field to crack. But that alone was not enough to shake Demon Godwu. Because even if his defensive force field is broken, his combat power is still strong, and his body itself is his greatest strength. Brian and Newton quickly ran in midair, and the scene at this time really matched the old saying, anti-aircraft guns against mosquitoes. Damn it, how long are we going to keep going like this? Can't we just leave? Brian ranted furiously. Newton, however, said, "No. If we miss this opportunity, the next time we'll have a much harder time dealing with this kind of guy. I've noticed that he can constantly gather information about us during the battle and then evolve in a targeted way. If it weren't for the fact that your abilities have been kept well secret from us, we would even risk failure this time. Therefore, we must defeat him in one fell swoop and then take him back for research." Newton's eyes were filled with a longing for the unknown and powerful civilization. That would be a major leap forward for our technology. Brian hung his ears helplessly and said while running for his life, "In that case, we can only wait for that crazy woman to arrive. On the other hand, how long do we have to wait? I'm afraid we won't last until she arrives, and we'll be cooked by his hot barbecue stick." "I don't want to become a hot dog," Brian ranted furiously. "It won't be long," Newton said, pushing his glasses up his nose, but he wasn't sure when Elsa would arrive either. "Because you can't use common sense to speculate about someone who lives in a mental hospital all the time." Franklin District. The officer at the military command center was talking to the higher-ups. After receiving the order, he replied solemnly, "Yes, the SAML missile is ready. The coordinates have been confirmed. Fire immediately." As soon as he finished speaking, he reached out and pressed the button to launch the missile. The launch silo of one of Colombia's most advanced missiles today, the SAML Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, opened, and then it dragged its flaming tail and flew off to the west. At the top of the Empire State Building, a girl wrapped in a wide-brimmed battle uniform looked excitedly at the huge intercontinental ballistic missile. Her eyes flickered, and then her body leaped straight ahead, landing directly on the ICBM as if it were coming right at her. Elsa stood on its back like she was on a skateboard, and the world's fastest ICBM headed straight for Fremons. "A little slow. Then let's go crazy." Elsa stood on the back of the missile, facing the fierce hurricane, but she didn't move an inch, as if she were a sculpture growing on the back of the missile. She even bent over the back of the speeding missile and placed her right hand on it. In just a split second, this weapon, which was arguably the fastest in human military history, broke through its limits and suddenly accelerated twice as fast, heading straight for Fremons. The straight-line distance from Franklin State to the Fremons battlefield is 15,000 kilometers. At the speed of the Izamar missile, it would take 16 minutes to arrive. But this time, in less than 5 minutes, the huge missile descended on the battlefield. For Fremons, Prodaja and the others received a report from Colombia that a missile was incoming. But at this particular time, they didn't care if it was a Western conspiracy or not. After all, even if it carried a high-yield Reaper of Love, it wouldn't have much of an impact on Fremons at this time. Brian and Newton had been entangled with Demon Godwu for several minutes. It looked like the man and the dog were in a bit of a mess, but in reality, no one was hurt. Brian's abilities could not deal a fatal blow to Demon Godwu, but they also prevented Demon Godwu from exerting its full power, so it could only choose to bombard them from a distance. Until a huge missile in the sky flew towards them. "Ha ha! Brian, your mother is here." The voice of the crazy girl rang in the ears of Newton and Brian, which made Brian suddenly jump and even want to quickly run away. Because that crazy girl liked to abuse dogs. Elsa landed on the battlefield at a speed that was comparable to Zhang Yi's. She stomped her feet in midair, rolled beautifully in midair, and the missile flew in the direction where Demon Godwu was located. Demon Godwu sensed a powerful energy reaction. He was no stranger to human thermal weapons, so he didn't give the missile a chance to land. After locking onto the trajectory of the missile, he fired a powerful energy cannon directly at it, instantly exploding the missile. Elsa had already rushed up to Brian and ridden directly behind him, clinging to his body. She removed his tactical helmet and then began to nibble on his ear. "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." Brian quickly and frantically called for help, but Newton flew over and put his helmet back on. "Okay, Magneto. This time I called you over to deal with a tough guy." Newton pointed at the Demon Godwu on the ground. Elsa gave Brian 2 bonbons before taking the time to look down. The intelligence system zoomed in, showing her the devastated battlefield, full of broken mechanical life forms. The remains of several super-large mechanical life forms stood out like collapsed high-rises. "Oh, what a pity! You guys have wrecked it all. But that one looks really high-level." She excitedly pointed at Demon Godwu. She was an expert in this field and could tell at a glance if something had been open wide. "To be honest, we can't do anything with him, so we need to enlist your help. Specific information about him was transmitted to you when it came in, and you should have read it, right?" Elsa narrowed her eyes, and a crazed light shone in her eyes. I've already read it. This guy is practically made for me, isn't he? But first, you have to help me deal with his defensive force field. Elsa's supernatural ability index was not high, only 22,000 points, which was much weaker compared to Brian's abilities. But against the demon god's body, her abilities could make a big difference. Newton said, Brian and I will figure it out. Brian pointed at his nose. Ah. Us? To be honest, this is a bit difficult. That's an order. Brian, Professor Da Vinci said he was interested in mechanical civilization's body. After bringing up Professor Da Vinci, Brian was at his wit's end. Who was his master, after all, and was he the one responsible for turning Brian into a superdog? Fine, I'll just break the eggshell, said Brian. At this point, seeing an additional enemy on the battlefield, Demon God Wu's heart had already given in to the idea of retreat. Each of the 10 demon gods had their own tasks to perform, and there was no way he could seek assistance from the others. No, this is a crazy idea. Facing this generation of creatures on the surface, shouldn't they be like gods playing with insects? Why did he have such a pessimistic thought? This is really not appropriate. However, the abilities of that white dog were too annoying, leaving him no room to show off his skills. Apart from firing energy cannons from a long distance, his powerful close combat skills could not be used at all. Because the opponent only needed to control gravity slightly, he could be pinned down again and again. Just as he was debating what to do next, the 3 of them, after some discussion, started to fly towards him. Just in time. Demon God Wu knew that the 3 of them must be up to something, but at the moment, he had no choice but to fight. The Lord of the 6 Wings didn't need weaklings. Like Gui, a guy who had been defeated by humans, he didn't even want to think about duplicating him. If only I had mastered powerful special abilities when I was still a carbon-based life form, like those 2. At the very least, I would have one more way to fight my enemies. Demon God Wu thought to himself. But for now, he still used the simplest method to launch a powerful attack. Boom! A red energy cannon spewed from his mouth, piercing the sky. Brian and Newton had to get close to Elsa in order to create an opportunity for her. First, they must block the attack of Demon God Wu, and then break through his defensive force field. Brian gave Newton a look and said, "Tell me your plan." "I know you have a way." Newton nodded and said, "Of course I do." Then he reached out and grabbed Brian by the leg, and threw him forward with all his strength. Ah! Brian's screams gradually faded away, and then he was hit precisely by the attack of the Demon God Wu. It was more accurate that Newton threw it, just using him to block the attack of the Demon God Wu. And in the gap between the attacks of the Demon God Wu, Newton raised the Atheist in his hand and adjusted the energy output frequency. A module to interfere with the defensive force field was added to the top of the Atheist. Immediately after the Demon God Wu made his move, Newton fired back with equal force. A crack had already appeared in the Demon God Wu's defensive force field, and with Newton's full force blow, the crack grew a little stronger. In the moment the shield, which could resist external special energy, including heat weapons and supernatural intrusions, broke, Elsa launched her ability with a wild laugh. Queen of Arms, an ability from Magneto, Elsa Goodman. She can generate a special magnetic field and manipulate almost any metal object. In the past, when she appeared on the battlefield, one person was equivalent to a powerful army. Any metal cold weapon that could be used by humans was ineffective against her. This madman later joined the Natural Science Association and became one of Columbia's top mutants with top-notch abilities. Demon God Wu instantly felt something was wrong. He lost control of his body and directly soared into the air, his limbs spread out and suspended in midair. The 2 huge sickles also fell out of his hands. Demon God Wu desperately tried to stimulate the body's operating system in order to regain control of his body, but in the midst of his struggle with Elsa, a dark shadow fell from the sky. Brian, who was covered in scorch marks, rolled in the air more than 10,000 times before landing precisely on top of him, with his legs on his shoulders. Overload. At that moment, Demon God Wu felt as if he had been thrust into the source of a supernova, and his body was subjected to indescribable, enormous pressure. Boom! His body was pressed hard into the ground by Brian, and his indestructible metal body instantly shattered and disintegrated. Elsa chased after him, grabbed his two swords with both hands, and plunged them downward with all her strength. After two dull click sounds, the huge scythe pierced through the body of Demon God Wu. Demon God Wu struggled desperately, even as he faced Brian's overwhelming pressure and his body was pierced through, but he still wanted to resist. As long as the source was not destroyed, physical damage was not fatal. However, the next moment, Elsa's face revealed a mocking expression. Clattering. His shell had already been breached, and the electronic parts inside his body flew out like internal organs as Elsa suddenly pulled her sword out. Electricity surged chaotically, and the body of the Demon God Wu completely lost its function. With the combined efforts of Elsa and Brian, his head was snapped off his neck. The Demon God Wu completely lost the ability to resist. Without the protection of a defensive force field, Elsa directly disassembled him into countless parts. Brian wiped the dust from his face and said to Elsa, "Just a moment." He climbed out of the deep pit in the ground, and at this time Newton walked over with a poker face. Rarely did Newton show a smile on his face. "We won. This was a very perfect collaboration, wasn't it?" Brian narrowed his eyes, walked step by step to Newton, and then punched him directly above his eye. "Oh! Damn it, Brian, what are you doing?" Brian didn't waste any time, jumping on Newton and punching and kicking him hard. Then he grabbed Newton's leg and slammed him like a sandbag into the nearby mechanical life form. He then took out a flamethrower from his backpack and gave Newton a full-service barbecue spa. Newton's screams resounded across the battlefield. It was a long time before Brian calmed down and left Newton, whose leg had been broken, where he was. Newton laboriously opened the medical backpack and took out a syringe from it, and the green liquid in it was injected into his shin. Soon, his broken leg was as good as new. "Anyway, it turned out well, didn't it?" he said expressionlessly. The city of Samarin. After Zhang Yi and the others returned, they quickly restored their condition. With Zhou Qi and Yang Xia by their sides, it was very easy to heal their wounds, restore their supernatural powers, and relieve their physical and mental fatigue. Zhang Yi was pondering a question. Judging from his battle with Demon God Ding, the three upper-level demon gods were definitely even more powerful. And before Demon God Ding died, he had definitely uploaded all of their abilities to the public network of the mechanical civilization. In other words, if there is another battle in the future, Zhang Yi's abilities will be rendered invisible when facing the upper-level demon gods. A poor information base could be fatal. Any oversight could result in the instant death of a top-level powerhouse. So after pondering for a long time, Zhang Yi made a decision. From now on, he will no longer take the initiative to attack any battlefield. Instead, he will wait for the results of the battles of other teams, or at least gather a certain amount of information, judge the strength of the opponent, and then decide whether to attack. I was incredibly lucky that the person from the Huashu Kingdom this time was him. If it had been Ho Tu, I guess she would have been in a daze after discovering that the other party had no flesh and blood. Liu Karen began repairing the snow owl and disassembling the demon god Ding to study its technology in shadow space. Due to the difference in time, the progress of each battlefield at this time was not the same. In some battlefields, the mutant troops of various countries were advancing slowly, first trying to get a clear picture of the battlefield before taking the next step. Zhang Yi and the others didn't start fighting the earliest, they just ended the fastest. They rested for a day in the city of Samarin. The next morning, a group message suddenly came through the public chat channel. Zhang Yi opened it and couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. The team of mutants from the Roman Temple of God who went to conquer demon god Jia has now been confirmed to have failed in their mission and all members were killed. Zhang Yi's mind flashed back to the middle-aged burly man with maroon curly hair. He had met this person at the meeting and had a deep impression of him. He gave off the impression of a very imposing man. During the meeting, he had been actively voicing his opinions, and his strong desire to express himself seemed to highlight his strength and status. According to the information on that guy, he was a Black Chariot-level mutant with a supernatural ability index of 26,000 points. The family of 3 also included Juno, his Black Chariot-level wife, and Ceres, his White Chariot-level adopted son. Unexpectedly, they had just returned when they received the news of their deaths. Zhang Yi carefully confirmed the notification and immediately asked Prodaja for all the information on the Roman mutant army. Prodaja quickly gave Zhang Yi a response. The information was limited, and Zhang Yi didn't know if the other party was concealing key information. But they were not mechanical life forms, and couldn't synchronize information in real time. If Juno and the others had died too suddenly, or if they had been selfish, they might not have passed on information about the battle with demon god Jia. Sure enough, when Zhang Yi saw the information, his brow furrowed even more tightly. The information was very limited, simply recording the size of the mechanical legion found in the target area and the time of the Roman mutant team's action. Judging by the time, they had set off only a day before Zhang Yi. And their deaths were confirmed an hour ago. In other words, the other party had at least 3 days to prepare, and then spent another 2 days formulating tactics before the war officially began. It wasn't a reckless charge to certain death, but the speed of their annihilation was truly astonishing. Deng Shintong also saw this notice. He walked over and said to Zhang Yi with some surprise, "A crusade force has already perished. But why did they have the courage to crusade against the demon god Jia, which has the highest difficulty level?" Zhang Yi thought about it for a moment and then said indifferently, "Perception determines everything.